We're going to go back to that book, but I wanted to read something from the book called From Babylon to Timbuktu. And for context, what the author is explaining here is that the children of Israel faced so much persecution that often they would flee to countries in Africa. It says here that many Jews fled into African countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, which would explain the Falashas that live in Ethiopia today that are treated separately from the other Ethiopians in their country. They are treated differently because the native Ethiopians know that there's a difference between these black Ethiopians and them, and that is simply that they are the children of Israel. And they took their customs with them as they migrated to these areas. And they actually face a lot of racism when they go to Israel today. It says in Cyrenaica, or Libya, throughout the last 2,500 years, the main factors that have contributed to the social migration of the Jews were wars, religious persecution, and commerce. All these factors were operating and gave rise to the African Jewish population. In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were filled with black Jewish slaves. And the kingdom of Judah was established in West Africa, which means that they established a royal kingdom in that specific area of Africa, and they also took their traditions with them, as well as many other African countries that they were scattered throughout. That's why when you read the book of Isaiah, specifically Isaiah chapter 11, it says that God will gather the children of Israel from many countries that are in Africa. But let's continue to read. Many nations transported the Jews into slavery, and the sons of Israel transmigrated to every continent. And what did Jesus say in Luke chapter 21 verse 24? That you will be led away captive throughout all of the nations, and that Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. And you have many Jews in Africa who are waking up and realizing who they are, as well as Jews in America. But let's continue. It says the Jewish philosopher Philo, who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, said that 1 million Jews resided in Libya and Egypt from the Katabalamos to the borders of Ethiopia. Now this next section is very important because often African Americans are told that you are sub-Saharan Africans. But this is something very interesting. It says the Byzantine emperors in the 5th and 6th centuries persecuted the Jews constantly. Therefore, multitudes of Jews were compelled to migrate into the Sahara Desert to the south. By this time, the Sahara Desert was heavily occupied with black Jews. And these black Jews, I'm not reading the book, but I'm just explaining history. These black Jews were later sold into slavery throughout all of the world. This is the history that we learn in school, but we don't learn anything prior to that time. Now let's keep reading from Babylon to Timbuktu. It says the Black Jewish Empire of Ghana. The ancient Black Empire of Ghana was established in the Western Sudan. During the colonial period, the Western Sudan was called French West Africa. The northern boundary of this region is the Sahara Desert. The western and southern border is Lake Chad. Some rivers of this region are the Senegal, the Gambia, the Volta, the Benin, the Logan, and last but not least is the famous Niger River. This river flows from the Guinea highlands northeast to the famous cities of Timbuktu and Gao. And then it makes a sharp turn and flows southeast towards the city of Benin in Nigeria. In ancient times, the Carthaginians from North Africa penetrated the Sahara Desert in the Western Sudan during the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC. When North and Eastern Africa had amassed over 1 million Jews, these Jews began a continuous migration to the region of the Niger River. As I have mentioned earlier, this region that extends across the entire width of Africa below the Sahara Desert from the Senegal to Somaliland is known as the Sudan or Black Africa. Between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the black Jews of Arabia continue migrating across the Red Sea to Ethiopia. The largest exodus of the Jews occurred during the persecution by the Arabs led by Muhammad. He had said on his dying bed he wanted Islam to be supreme throughout all of Arabia. There was a Jewish tribe called Rechab which crossed the Red Sea and migrated to the extreme point of the western Sudan. At the same time, the Jews were migrating westward across the Sudan from Ethiopia. They also migrated southward from Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco to the fertile region between Senegal and the Niger rivers. When the Jews from the north and the east met between these two rivers, they established a confluence or a crossroad in West Africa where men could exchange their culture, ideas, and merchandise. These Jewish migrations went on with great frequency about 300 AD, and they continued with the utmost regularity for 1200 years. Joseph J. Williams points out the course of the Jewish migration from northeastern Africa. He writes that the Jews migrated up the Nile, passing Memphis, Elephantine, Karun, and then they turned west at Kordofan in central Sudan. In the region of the White Nile, Williams thinks some Jews settled in the country of Shilluk in the southern Sudan and Uganda. He continues by tracing the migration from Kordo to Darfur, Lake Chad, Kano, and then to the countries of the Niger River. The author, who is Rudolph R. Windsor by the way, says the black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of the black Jewish culture, the Jews were not absorbed into the population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leather workers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmiths, and so on and so forth. The black Hebrew kings of Ghana actually had two titles. 1. Kayamaga, which is Master of Gold, and 2. Ghana War Tree. Now we're going to read to the source that we read in the beginning from the book, The Negro Question Part 2, Who Am I? He says, you cannot bring up the discussion of the Empire of Ghana without mentioning the Great Bantu Migration, which was 60 million people. And we just saw that the other author also talked about the migration of the Hebrews into these various different African countries. Bantu was once the language that was spoken from Ghana to South Africa. Bantu was spoken in Ghana, Ashanti, which are the Levites, Lemba, Levites, Kingdom of Judah, Slave Coast, Congo, and Zimbabwe. So they still retain their original languages as they fled to this place. Because people often ask the question, how can you tell the difference between the Hebrews and how can you tell the difference between the children of Ham? Most of the time you can tell the difference based on their language patterns. You can tell the difference based on traditions that they do that they don't even know comes from the Bible. But anyways, it says, why would all these people flee to West Africa? Some fled the Assyrian invasion of Israel in 722 BC. Some fled the Babylonian invasion of Israel in 606 BC, and some fled the Roman invasion of Israel in 70 AD, and some fled the Black Arab invasion of Israel in 640 AD. And there are artifacts of the children of Israel in all of these places, such as this one. Observe all of these artifacts that show indeed that they were black people.